Welcome everybody to another Flexera webinar. Today we have a great topic for you. From cloudy to transparent, managing assets in the sky. Now before we get going, a couple of quick housekeeping items for everybody. First of all, this webinar is going to be recorded, and all attendees will get an email with a link to play it back, so you can review the information we're going to provide for you today whenever you like. Second, if you have a question, you see a chat box on your screen on the left-hand side, go ahead and ask it. We're going to try to get to everybody's questions towards the end. Don't wait to the end to ask your question. Just go ahead and get it in the queue right up front, so that we'll be able to get to everybody. Now, sorry, quick technical glitch. There we go. So when we're looking at software assets, think about the cloud and the impact it's had on your professional career and your environment. And today it's not a question of if you use the cloud, it's a question of when, because actually you're using the cloud today, even though you may not really know it. Virtually anything you want can be had by the cloud. And it's important to have visibility in that, because transparency is essential for security and performance and all sorts of other things that are vital to your company and your career. So let me turn it over to our speaker, who's going to take you through all the information today. Cyndi Tackett, she's Vice President of Solutions here at Flexera. Cyndi, take it away.
Thank you, Eric. As Eric mentioned, I'm Cyndi Tackett, Vice President of Solutions Engineering at Flexera. It's my pleasure to spend the next few minutes with you talking about gaining control of your cloud infrastructure. So when cloud computing first became popular, it was fairly straightforward and most commonly associated with SaaS, or software as a service. Of course, Salesforce.com, applications like that were very prolific within the organization. But today, virtually anything can be bought as a service. So we've moved from the seeming simplicity of SaaS to platform as a service. You can buy containers as a service, content as a service, disaster recovery as a service, workspace as a service, desktop as a service. Golly gee day, just everything can be bought as a service. And along the way, what's happened to us is that we've lost our 360-degree view of assets. So it's really tough to know where to start. If you haven't started from the very beginning trying to control these things, where to start getting a handle on everything, especially since business units can go out and just buy these services on their own without necessarily involving central IT. Many organizations are quickly adopting a cloud-first approach, meaning that for any new IT project or transformation projects or even upgrades of existing on-premise applications, the first choice would be to try and move the technology to the cloud. Some companies even have a cloud-only strategy. And the idea behind this movement is to free up IT resources and recategorize costs. But it changes the game for IT asset management. So as an IT asset management professional, you don't have visibility into all of the assets as they move into the cloud. So we'll talk today about why improving visibility to these cloud environments is important. And this is really a better picture of the environment that you have today. So we still have our internal data centers that host our on-premise software, same as we have had traditionally. But now outside our firewalls, there's these multiple cloud services, right? And the challenge is that every one of these services that you can buy, they all have their own proprietary ways of giving you information. So they have their own way of billing. Every vendor has their own way of identifying your internal users, which might not be the unique ID that you identify your internal users with. Every vendor has a different way of measuring usage, of monetizing that usage, and of reporting the usage back to you. Every vendor has a different way of provisioning users and subscriptions. So how do you actually not only buy the subscription but sign up employees to start using them? So this gets really complex to manage because there's just no standards or consistent ways across all of these vendors to procure, provision, to manage, and then to deprovision all of these services so that they don't keep proliferating within the environment without much governance on them. So what this means for us is that our game has changed, right? So we need to be business ready to support these new cloud business models. We need to be faster because these services pop up in no time. There's even new kinds of services that pop up like robotics as a service and all of these things that we might not have heard of or have processes around. We need to be informed about what all is happening, which is difficult in this environment as things can move into the cloud without ITAM or procurement necessarily being involved. We need to still be in control of managing all of the assets. We need to be unified and have automated ways of dealing with, with all of these more complex things that we're dealing with. And we need to be connected to not only to new environments, but also to new stakeholders within our organization that we might not have dealt with before, that may be out in the business units. And most importantly, we need to be everywhere, so that as things move into the cloud, our asset management processes are moving into the cloud as well, so we gain visibility into what all is happening. So there was a CIO Quick Pulse survey done, I believe last fall, October timeframe, and 50% of the CIOs who responded to that survey said that visibility into all IT assets, whether it's on-premise or infrastructure as a service or SaaS, is critical. And only 2% ranked the visibility into IT assets of lesser importance because they need this data to help in decision making about ongoing costs, about future investments, things like budgeting and capital planning. How are they going to allocate costs? How are they going to make decisions about disaster and recovery, whether that should be in the cloud, on-premise? There's all kinds of things around it that would help them make better decisions. And most importantly, just understanding whether the Cloud First initiative is actually bringing the ROI that the company expected, whether that be in reduced labor, IT are doing different things, whether they have reduced capital expenditures or even reduced risk. So I was actually speaking with an IT leader at one of our clients who stated something like, we want to get out of the business of running data centers. We're not in the data center real estate business. We want to focus on our business. So getting out of the data center operations, I think, is something that they're driving for. And that's goodness, but only if you have visibility into your new infrastructure that's out there. So if you don't have visibility in the cloud, that has impacts. It has risks. So the same Quick Pulse survey, you can see here what their concerns are, primarily around opening themselves up to cybersecurity threats. So as an example, if you have end-of-life software out in your service environments, you need visibility into that because that's a security threat. Tracking support costs and the cost of the overall infrastructure is important. Making sure that the new infrastructure and services are actually delivering the same or even better performance than you would have on-premise. And then the cloud introduces, and we're going to talk a lot more about this, the cloud introduces all sorts of license compliance risk with bring your own software license if you're not calculating your license position correctly. And they want to track productivity to make sure that the decision to move to the cloud doesn't actually have the unintended consequence of actually being a drain on productivity. So there's a lot of impacts to, to this movement and transformation that's going on. The challenge is it's a daunting task because gaining visibility into all of these assets really requires us to evolve and rethink our technology and our processes. So I talked earlier about the lack of standardization across vendors, which leads to manual processes to figure out what all is out there. And it's also difficult to speak a common language when each service provider uses very different terms to mean the same thing, or they have different definitions and taxonomies. So it's hard to compare apples to apples of one supplier to the next supplier. And then sometimes the sources of data aren't reliable. That could be either because they're incomplete, or we just don't feel comfortable that we have visibility into 100% of the estate. There's always the unknown of what else is out there that we don't know about. And then the timeliness of information is also a challenge, especially if you have manual processes. And just gaining access, right, to the environments that are out there and figuring out what all you have. And then there's siloed functions. So if one person is buying something and another person is using it and another person is tracking it, and then procurement might not even know about it. So how do you get data that brings together all of these silos so that everyone's has speaking the same language and has visibility into everything that's out there? So with improved visibility, IT leaders believe that this can greatly help with other initiatives such as IT service management, especially if you're moving production instances into the cloud. Obviously that has a big impact on ITSM processes. And then data centers are undergoing a drastic transformation with this cloud-first movement. So being able to understand exactly what's happening, what's in your data center, and what's moving up to the cloud is important. IT finance management, of course, benefits by understanding all IT spending, including the IT shadow spend that happens when people sign up for these services. And of course, IT procurement, they always benefit by having information that can help them reduce their per unit costs and then negotiate better with your service providers. So to achieve this nirvana of comprehensive cloud asset management, Flexera proposes four distinct steps or four distinct areas of focus that we'll spend our time on today. The first is managing and optimizing your SaaS spend. The second is managing software that's in the cloud, primarily in infrastructure as a service environments like AWS or Azure or even your private cloud. The third is to manage the infrastructure spend itself. So this would be the cost that you're paying for AWS or Azure to make sure there's not waste in the underlying infrastructure expenses. And then finally, bringing it all together to give you that 360-degree view of all things that are going on, whether it be SaaS, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and then of course you still have your on-premise environment. So bringing all of this together so that you can look at, what is my position with Microsoft? Should I increase or decrease the amount of Azure that we have in our EA agreement, things like that. So first let's talk about managing and optimizing SaaS spend. The great thing about SaaS is that it is difficult to get out of license compliance. So that takes away a big audit burden for most SaaS vendors, that is. So that takes away a big audit burden and that risk. The bad news about SaaS is that it's quite easy to overspend with SaaS vendors, and we'll talk about some ways to avoid that overspend. So the SaaS market itself has just grown incredibly. It was less than about $50 billion in 2011, and it's projected to be $240 billion by 2020. So I didn't calculate the percentage of that, but the percentage growth is phenomenal. And most companies are trying to bring their SaaS vendors under management, at least know about them, just like you try to know about all of your other software that's in the environment. But it's difficult because since the ownership moves from central IT and central procurement, which typically would buy, software in the traditional way, now it moves into the hands of the business unit. So it's hard to know what all they're buying. They can go out and buy things just with their credit cards, their own cost centers, et cetera. So it's really hard for companies to get their arms around the amount of SaaS that's used out in the wild. And then, of course, the other shift is that with SaaS, you're moving from CapEx to OpEx, and that creates a need for frequent and ongoing expense management to stay within the budget. You no longer have like these 3-year true-up times, things like that you had with traditional on-premise software. You need to make sure that you're managing this as if it's OpEx, right? As if you can change the trajectory of the spend on a month-over-month basis. And then tracking usage is also tough, figuring out the users themselves and what in the world they're doing with the service. But the key to containing SaaS is really focusing on the spend management and resource optimization of it, which is what we're going to talk about. So now we need to rethink our business and technical requirements that we have to manage our new world of subscription. So these requirements, they should really include what Flexera calls a framework to collect SaaS usage data. So since all of the vendors, SaaS vendors, have different types and formats for the information that they provide, the best route is to have a flexible tool that will connect to any SaaS provider, where you're really just doing like a source to target data mapping of what information the SaaS vendor provides to what information, what do we call it within the organization. So that will give you the ability to connect to any SaaS provider, including, of course, the more popular applications like Salesforce.com or Adobe Creative Cloud, ServiceNow, Workday, et cetera. But also maybe the smaller spend vendors that you have like Concur or Splunk or Slack. So by having this framework in place that removes the need for developing individual connectors on the technical side, but more importantly, individual processes that you're using with each of these vendors. Next, we need to discover what SaaS apps are really being used and to stratify them so that you can leverage your buying power behind your preferred vendors and eliminate maybe even overlapping services from multiple vendors. So if I have 3 SaaS providers that are providing the same business function, how can I clean that up? You can also start to consolidate the subscriptions and contracts themselves. So, for example, a lot of companies have multiple Salesforce.com contracts. So bringing those, all under one contract helps you both with your dollars and just the pure management of it. Or it's very common that we see like multiple business units will have different Slack subscriptions or agreements with these vendors. So you can consolidate these to leverage your buying power. In doing this, the business value of it hopefully you can reduce cost on a month-over-month basis or on a per subscription basis, and then better negotiate based upon your actual usage and optimize the subscription levels that you have out there. So in terms of optimization of SaaS applications is a little more straightforward than optimization of on-premise software, because with on-premise software, you have these painful remediation processes that you have to go through. So the optimization of SaaS is a little easier. You just need new processes, right, to be able to do it. The first recommendation is to assign the right license model or the right price point to the right users. So as an example, Salesforce, they have multiple price points, so that they'll have a power user, they'll have a content viewer, they'll have a chat user. So you got to be diligent about making sure that the right license types are assigned to users based upon the real features and functions that they're going to access according to their job role. A lot of times during the provisioning process, if you have a catalog or something that can help ask the user questions, so that if someone raises their hand and says, yeah, I need to get into Salesforce, that you really understand now, hey, what are you using this for? If you're going to use this for some minimal thing, then we need to know that up front, so that we're not just by default assigning our most expensive license type. And then the offboarding process. So the offboarding process becomes really important. And this is hard, because since the business units are in control of their own SaaS applications, most business units don't really handle employee offboarding. That's done from like a central HR process. So they don't necessarily have good processes to make sure that users are removed from SaaS applications as they leave the company, because obviously you don't want to be paying monthly subscription costs for employees that are gone, right? And then you can reassign those subscriptions instead of buying new licenses for new employees that show up. And then make sure the employees are actually using the subscription. So just like you track usage on things like Visio and Project, you need to be just as diligent on tracking whether employees are actively using the subscription you're paying for. So if I have a Salesforce.com subscription and I'm not using it, that's a great opportunity to reclaim that user subscription, if they're not using it. Very similar to what you do with the usual suspects like Visio and Project in the desktop IT asset management world. So now let's talk about a harder topic, managing software in the cloud. This is a challenge, primarily with bring your own software license. As infrastructure spins up, you can install your own software. So there's really two facets to understanding what software is out there in the cloud. And by out there in the cloud, we're primarily talking about infrastructure as a service, the things that would be out in AWS or Azure. And it's basically determining whether your company is supplying your own entitlements, or whether your service provider is supplying those entitlements. So the first option is bring your own license. So this is where your employees are installing software in the cloud with your license entitlements. So this means that the company, you, are accountable and responsible for license compliance. And in fact, most traditional software vendors like Oracle and IBM, they have very specific points tables for using their software and infrastructure as a service. They have very specific, and they're putting in more terms and conditions around how you can do this. But you got to be tracking this. The other trend is licensing as a service. So this is where the cloud provider actually includes some of the software in the cost of the cloud service. So as an example, if I spin up a Microsoft Azure machine, then that may even include some of the software stack, right? I could spin it up and it could include the operating system, maybe SQL Server, maybe it includes Office. There's a bunch of things that I can choose from to have pre-built into these instances. So if I do that, that's obviously going to be more expensive for the per unit cost itself of the infrastructure, but it does reduce our risk. And then employees like that, right? Because then, hey, I bring up a machine and all this stuff's already on it. I have less to do. But the key is to make sure that you know exactly what licenses are provided by the vendor versus what licenses you put out there yourself, because the last thing that you want to do is double count, right? License. So if I have an instance where SQL Server was included, I don't want to include that, right, as something that the company needs to pay for yet again. So the challenge is that you probably, depending on what you have, you might not be able to rely on your traditional inventory tools to see what software is out there. So you need an inventory solution that not only can see that a machine is out there, right, in your company's name in the cloud, but also the software that's installed on it, and to determine where the software came from. Did you supply it, or did the service provider supply it? And certainly you need visibility into the capacity of the machine so that you can calculate capacity licenses like WebSphere or SQL Server. And then the other difficult part is you need to take all of that data, what's out in the cloud, and then combine it with your on-premise instances so that you have a total view of what all do I have with IBM, what's my total license position with Microsoft, et cetera. And then the other challenge is that machines in the cloud, they spin up and they go away fairly frequently, and a lot of times this whole spinning up and then going away are outside of our normal change control processes. And then the cloud's elastic, so environments are expanding and contracting all of the time. And that has a lot of implications where you've supplied the license and the cost of the software is determined by like the number of cores or the number of processors that are dedicated to the instance at any given time. So again, being able to bring this all into a central, under central management is important. So the requirements here have also shifted. The requirements for managing bring your own software license are first to collect the information about the instances that you have in the cloud. So just like you discover hardware inventory devices that are on-premise, just knowing that they're there. And then once discovered, being able to normalize the applications. So figuring out what applications are actually on the box, and being able to do things like filtering out the noise, like if it has Notepad or operating system components, all of those things are just noise that you don't want to be in the weeds with, and other non-relevant applications for licensing. And then apply a standard naming convention and taxonomy to it. So that will give you a common language of what applications are in the cloud, and then you'll be able to contrast that and combine that with what you have on-premise. And then tracking the role of the machine is important. So a lot of cloud instances are actually used for testing and development, and that has a big impact, right, on your product use rights, because if, for example, with Microsoft SQL Server, if you're on software assurance, you don't have to count cold backup machines. So tracking what the machine is used for can help you apply product use rights, and hopefully that process is automated. And then the discovery tool should also catch short-lived instances. So as these things spin up and go away, a lot of companies are now putting some kind of inventory solution in the blueprint or the template itself, so that the inventory tool is right there off the bat when it's spun up. The other option is to pull information directly from, for example, Amazon, so that you're getting it on the back end, so that it should include everything. And of course, you need the ability to calculate your accurate license position for everything that you have in the cloud and everything that you have on premise. And ideally, as much of this is automated as possible, and you don't have manual processes to get to this. And the business value it provides is, of course, to reduce the risk of non-compliance and accelerate the transformation like the Cloud First initiative. So Flexera actually worked with Amazon to provide our customers with the ability to gain insight to the cloud instances, and it actually uses Amazon's APIs to pull data automatically about all of your cloud environments. And that gives you an automated process of doing this, but also visibility into the instance type, who owns it, how long has it been out there, is it running, is it not running, how much capacity does it have. And then it also knows the applications that are on it and can normalize those so that you understand what applications are out there, how those applications are categorized, or what business function do they serve, whether they're end of life or not, and other things like security vulnerability data. So being able to figure out the applications themselves and then enrich that data with market information like end of life or security vulnerabilities. And then, so in a way, you can kind of think of this as another inventory source, right? Our cloud inventory source that then you can combine with your on-premise inventory solutions. All right, so now we have our SaaS vendors under control, right? We have insight into what all's in the cloud, and the next step is to focus on the infrastructure spend itself. So for every machine that you have out in AWS or Azure, there's a usage fee that goes along with that, and you need to govern and manage the underlying spend. So ideally, this would fall into the asset manager's responsibility to make you continue to be relevant. So from the same Quick Pulse survey, the growth of infrastructure as a service, most of the CIOs reported that 40 to 50% of their applications were today delivered or deployed via infrastructure as a service. And so managing these machines in the cloud, this is the new hardware asset management. Companies have long developed sophisticated hardware lifecycle processes, and now you need to apply similar processes to machines in the cloud. So how do they get procured? How do you pick the lowest cost provider? How do you pick the lowest cost template? How do they get provisioned? More importantly, how do they get end of life? So when they're no longer necessary, you're still not carrying the cost of them, because it's really easy to spin these things up and then forget about it. So it's important to start developing what I've termed instance lifecycle management processes very quickly. So if you're not doing this, the challenge of not managing the cloud is as soon as employees figure out how to put stuff in the cloud, ooh boy, baby, the sprawl begins. So every one of these instances costs the company money, right? And you need to know what the machines are for so that you can start applying metrics to it and figuring out, is the cost of the infrastructure itself, is it worth the value that these machines are bringing to us? Or just like you do with your own capacity management, do any of the machines that we're already paying for, do they have capacity on them? Or if we eliminate some of the capacity, then of course it can help you save costs. So infrastructure in the cloud is really easy to get, right? Anyone with a credit card can spin up these things, but they rarely get unspun or killed off. So the need for governance is great before your cost gets out of control and you have a huge estate in the cloud and you don't even know how to go about managing it. So the focusing first on controlling the spend and make sure that you're not spending more than required based on business needs is important. And then looking at idle resources is important, making sure that machines are still necessary and are actually being used. And then we want to choose the lowest cost resources, whether that's another provider or the instance type that is chosen, or even looking at whether on-premise would be cheaper. Because over and over what we're hearing in the market and from our clients is that their cloud costs consistently run over budget, which is always extraordinarily painful. So being able to accurately budget is critical then, so that you can start tracking actuals and taking action on them if it starts to get out of control. So the requirements here for managing infrastructure costs include being able to import costing data from your vendors automatically, hopefully, so that you can track these costs over time. So just like the cloud is elastic, your spend is elastic, and it's really hard to be able to forecast this stuff. So you need to have a good understanding of what environments are used and what environments are not being used. And then if expenses start to rise, now you have some visibility so that you can remediate the situation before you're hit with large unbudgeted expenses. So then bringing this all together, you can start putting together a financial dashboard so you have the single pane of glass into your spend across all of your service providers, right, across all your vendors. So one optimization trick you can see here, it says I have 286,000 unreserved hours. One optimization trick are these reserved instances. So these are services that you basically pay for in advance, and reserved instances are much more cost effective because they give you a significant discount over spinning up resources on demand. So just like companies buy unnecessary software, you can buy unnecessary reservations, if you're not careful. So before your other ones are depleted. So you can also start to look at individual accounts, spending by cost center, spending by instance type, et cetera, to get much more of a fiscal look at what's going on in the cloud. And then there's also some operational components to this as well. You need to start looking at usage. So that's not only what all's out there, but whether they're being used or not. And the requirements here are to make sure that you're optimizing your reserved instance spend and monitoring utilization rates, because what you don't want to do is end up with ghost machines in the cloud, resources that have been spun up and then forgotten about, or just never destructed. This enables you to maximize the utilization of what you're paying for and eliminate idle resources. And then also with this, I mentioned that reserved instances are cheaper, right? That you get a much better price point. So being able to forecast what that optimal reserved instance or how much reserved instances you should be paying for, that's the nirvana, right? Because then you have just enough cloud that you're paying for to meet the demand that's coming into the organization. And then this information is ideally contained in an operational dashboard that gives you the information that you need to take action by looking at the average utilization rate, optimizing reserved instances. You can also look at things like what instances aren't tagged. If things aren't tagged, it makes it more difficult to understand the business function. And then begin to take action on it. So if you have underutilized resources or even cost centers that have taken too many liberties, then pull that all together. And finally, bring it all together. So now you have visibility into the cloud, so let's bring it all together and look at our holistic spend and footprint to get a total view of what's happening, regardless of whether it's in the cloud or on-premise. And management of all things as a service, it's a shared responsibility between IT ops, IT asset management, finance, procurement. So the first step is centralizing the knowledge about everything that's in the cloud and then gaining visibility. And when you do this, now, ideally you have this repository of cloud asset data. And this data is extremely valuable to other functions within the organization. So like enterprise architecture, who makes decisions about where and what infrastructure the company should use, or IT service management. So certainly if you have production instances in the cloud, then all of this asset data is of great benefit to them. Or security, right, who needs to know about software so that they can understand software vulnerabilities, and other functions like portfolio management or financial management. But ideally you have this hub of cloud asset data that then everyone can use for cloud insights. With the better insights, then they can make better decisions. If you have transparency into the cloud, then you can look at reducing your risk from non-compliance, reducing your costs, making sure you're not paying too much for this services, and increasing your organizational effectiveness as your company is moving to the cloud. So in summary, gaining visibility into the cloud, it enables you to have the information that you need to guarantee that your cloud-first strategy is cost-effective. Gain visibility into the new environments. Of course, Flexera has tools to make this quite easy. And then most importantly, just rethinking this. The old processes and technologies, they just won't work. You need solutions that are future-proof, so as your organization is transforming into the cloud, then your tools and technologies can handle that. And then the governance of what's going into and out of the cloud is also critical. So you need policies, processes to change, and realizing that you can add value to the SAM function by sharing cloud asset data with other stakeholders. And finally, kind of back where we started, you got to be everywhere. Be on-premise, be in the cloud, be in your infrastructure as a service, be in your platform as a service, visibility into software as a service, all these things that are coming together and companies can now go out and buy, or business units can now go out and buy. You got to be everywhere to have control over everything. So that's it. Back to you, Eric. Did we get any questions in?
Actually, we did. And we have
them
queuing up. Let me just change slides real quick. And
sure.
There we go. So it's time for questions. And we have several already in the queue, but go ahead and add it into your chat box. Hopefully you took some notes during the presentation. Before we start going into questions, I just want to put the next screen up so that everyone can get it. If you want more information, we have a blog with all sorts of information. Some of our blogs are read hundreds of times per day, and they're years old because they have such good information on how to do things. So go ahead, look at the blog, search for what you're interested in. Follow us on Twitter at SAM Insights, where we have a lot of tips and tricks. And if you want more information about what the things you need to look for in cloud, particularly if you're choosing a cloud infrastructure management solution to understand your utilization rates or how much things are costing you, we have a free white paper, and you can just copy down the URL right there to be able to download it. So I'm going to leave this screen up here, and let's get into some of the questions we have. So I might answer some, but most of the time Cyndi is going to answer them. So here's the first one. Cyndi, just see if I can read this or put it in a different way. How does the use of cloud infrastructure impact our software licensing?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard, clients or people out in the market say that the cloud's going to fix all of your software licensing problems, right? And that is somewhat true with SaaS. So where you're buying subscriptions, then the subscriptions are actually controlled by the vendors, right? And you don't have employees just installing software everywhere. They actually have to sign up and register, so there's some event, right, that you know that this happens. So in that aspect, software licensing gets easier with SaaS. You just got to make sure that you're not overspending. However, with infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, it makes licensing way more complex simply because you got to gain visibility into the cloud, which can be challenging in and of itself, and then you still have your on-premise, and then you got to bring all of this together. And just because the simple fact that I can go to a website, spin up a fairly big machine, and then start installing expensive software titles on it, it makes the SAM role really more critical than ever. Actually, it's funny. I was in a meeting this past Tuesday, and a gentleman had a sticker on the back of his laptop, the laptop case, and it said, "My other laptop is an Azure data center." That's what the sticker said. My other laptop is an Azure data center. So that's what you're dealing with, right? This mentality that my other laptop is an Azure data center. So that makes it tough.
Well, here's a thought about that. A lot of people think the cloud solves these software asset management challenges, but it doesn't. It just adds a whole nother complexity to that, because now you have to think about where my software is located. Where's my inventory? Is it here or is it there? So just one of those things to look out for. All right, next question. Do you expect software audits to increase or decrease as software moves to the cloud?
Statistically, we see them increasing some. We know factually that software vendors, the whole bring your own software license scares the doozy out of them, right? Because they're very concerned that they're not going to be monetizing their software, right? And we already see this, that software vendors are putting more terms and conditions in their contracts about how you can use their software in the cloud. A lot of them have actually come out and said, hey, if you are going to move our software to the cloud, here are our preferred vendors or the service providers. They have points tables for what you're doing in the cloud. So we do expect the number of audits to increase, but more importantly, the audit process itself will change, because the vendors are going to start wanting to know what all you have in the cloud as part of the audit process. And the real risk for you is that they have visibility and you don't, right? Because most instances in the cloud are, believe it or not, actually VPN'd into your corporate network. So what you don't want to happen is that the vendor's audit scripts find those things and you don't know about it. So you've got to find robust ways to find these instances, to count the software on them. It's all about getting ahead of the game.
On the one point you made, though, before, there's a follow-up question about audits we just received, but you mentioned during your presentation about SaaS subscriptions, and you did say that the risk of audit is low, but it's possible you overpay. Your risk of overpayment is high, because anyone can subscribe, and it all depends upon your usage level or the type of the type of license you have, or I think you used the term price point, right?
Yep. It's all about the price point. And a lot of companies, when they first decide, okay, we're going to go all in on Salesforce or all in on Workday, they buy these enormous number of licenses, but then they don't really go back and clean that stuff up during their next negotiation.
Yep. Well, here's a follow-up audit question. What type of audits should we do and require to have the right to do towards the cloud vendors? I guess that's what we should perhaps self-audit, so we understand where what we're entitled to use in mobility rights or putting software in the cloud.
Yep, absolutely. Self-audit, mobility rights. Was the question more about, though, like what should I expect Amazon or Azure to provide me?
Mm-hmm. Possibly.
Yeah, but potentially. So that's where I think there's an opportunity for, if we get this right, and we get asset management under control, then, do we have an opportunity to go to Amazon and Azure and demand, hey, these are the things that my company has to have, right, to be in compliance. So, and if we do that, if we get enough crowd share of that ask, then maybe standards and common definitions will become more attractive to them.
And here's another related question. Are tools evolving to examine considerations of virtual machines by cluster or host or by cores per host to automate the processes of some of these challenges being faced in usage models, such as Microsoft SPLA? So in other words, not just about computing usage, but compute whether or not it is more cost-effective to license in the data center and the server, or I guess versus for cloud. So basically, what about tools? Can tools examine the different evolving license models inside of VMs?
Yep, absolutely. So tools are evolving, especially to pick up clusters, things like host affinity, which, crazy or not, affects your licensing. So yes, Flexera actually has FlexNet inventory solution that is built for the question of licensing, which is all about virtual machines and clusters and active versus passive failover machines, and all of those things are very important for licensing. And then the tools themselves to communicate with the infrastructure or service providers, those are evolving as well. So Flexera actually worked with Amazon to develop a set of APIs that we use in a solution called Cloud Asset Insights, which brings in basically inventory information about everything that you have out there in the cloud and normalizes it. So yeah, we're seeing not only from Flexera, of course, but just out in the marketplace, more tools to plug the hole of this need.
Here's a question I think is right within your area of expertise. Does Flexera have a certified integration with ServiceNow Asset Management? Bit off different topic than cloud, but what does Flexera have a certified integration with ServiceNow Asset Management?
The word certified, I'm not positive if we're certified. We're a ServiceNow technology partner, which means that we've gone through a process. Do you know what the term that they use, Eric? But we have gone through the process with both our FlexNet Manager solution and Data Platform solution to be ServiceNow certified, I guess, that we can both populate ServiceNow with software asset information and other CIs, and then we also have bidirectional integration into ServiceNow so that we can get things out of the CMDB that are important for licensing, like the role of the machine.
Okay. We've got time for just a few more. This is an interesting one. Are there any purchasing processes that we can look at as a model to define our cloud procurement standards?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Actually, after I was going through the summary slide there, I was thinking that I missed something that's really important. So there's absolutely things that you should do to your purchasing processes, and I would start with a policy. What is your company's policy about obtaining cloud instances? Is it through centralized procurement? Are cost centers able to procure cloud instances on their own? If they are, what's the payment mechanism? Are people allowed to put this on their personal credit cards or their company cards? What's the process and policy about obtaining production instances versus stuff that's used for development, testing, or something that people spin up just for fun? What's the corporate standard for infrastructure as a service? Is it AWS? Is it Azure? Once you start doing this, once you start picking a standard, having policies, then that enables you to negotiate better pricing, right, with a single vendor. It enables you to start automating these processes of provisioning and deprovisioning the assets. But if you don't have a standard, it's really tough to manage all of it. And then start defining things like what types of approvals do we need? Can we put our standard offering of what infrastructure as a service is, maybe put that in our app store or software catalog so that we're enforcing that people buy the standard. And then, in the policy, start determining who's responsible for commissioning and decommissioning all of the resources. So is it central IT? Is it the business unit? So the policy is really important. And once you have these policies and guidelines in place, then you can start to build your procurement processes that match these corporate guidelines. And of course, Flexera has tools to help you automate the process. But without the lack of that guidance, then there's just no telling what's happening out in the wild.
Yeah, I'll give you a great example. Actually happened to me. I knew a development manager who needed to do some beta testing for software. However, this is not at Flexera, by the way, but the internal process to spin up a server, a virtual machine, was so difficult or so lengthy, and he needed this test done very quickly. He just went out and purchased a virtual machine from Amazon, put on his credit card, and then ran the beta test with customers from that. But then again, now that capacity is unknown throughout the organization. No one else could leverage it. No one knew how long he had done the subscription for. So a good way to think about this in terms of policy is to model it off a travel and entertainment policy. And here's why. Many companies where you have people who travel for business, they have to go through a travel portal so that when you book the trip, it follows a certain workflow for approval, and you're choosing only authorized or approved vendors, so you stay within compliance.
At an improved price point, right?
Correct,
yeah.
yes.
Absolutely.
And the T&E policy is very clear. If you go outside of this travel portal, you won't get reimbursed. And sometimes it's as simple as that. And a cloud policy, a purchasing policy towards cloud, could actually mirror a travel and entertainment policy. If you need a cloud instance, no problem. Go through our app portal or app store or service catalog, software catalog, and because there may be excess capacity that in a reserved instance that just needs to be spun up. And this way, you're not going rogue, so to speak, and costing the company money when we can't measure that. So that's a good tip for everybody. Just model, if you're looking for a cloud policy, just model your T&E policy.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. But it starts with the policy. And if you don't have one, start getting one together because it's super important. And then that should drive everything else, policies and standards.
Well, I think we've got time for one more, and this one is more of a business related. This is a good one. I've been asked this before, so it's interesting that we're getting it again. With the growth of cloud, has demand been driven by IT organizations or business units looking for alternatives from corporate IT?
Well, in my opinion, I think it's both. The cloud is a wild and wonderful place, Eric. I don't have to wait on a machine to be provisioned by IT. I can go up and spend it any time with very little governance. So you have all this computing power at your fingertip with literally the press of a button on a web page. And it's just a powerful and addictive, and it's great. But it's also super expensive. So, just like with the comparison to like the Oracle DBA who goes and installs $50,000 of software on a machine and doesn't really understand, right, that it costs that much. So, it's really easy to lose track of the fact that with this power comes responsibility. And going back to what we were just talking about, you have to be very clear with your employees on what their responsibilities are for controlling costs and controlling the risk. But in my opinion, it's both. I think it's just such a great, addictive place to be that the demand's being driven by all parts of the business.
Yeah, that's true. I'll give you one quick example of something I had seen. I know a company that had done a huge global on-premises ERP implementation, and apparently there were some issues with that. So the sales team was not happy with their part of this ERP implementation, so they went out and on their own purchased a cloud solution that did essentially the same thing, that better met their requirements. And the company, rather than saying, no, you can't use that, you have to use what they did, because it was a sales organization and they had a lot of influence, the company was forced to adopt that cloud solution in addition to the on-premises ERP solution. So it's an interesting thing. It actually, in that particular case, the growth of cloud was pushed by the business unit, the sales leaders who felt it was better for their business as a stakeholder. So it's an interesting thing. It is being driven by both. We're up against the top of the hour, so I think we're going to have to wrap here. I'm sorry if we didn't get to every question. It was good. We have many questions still in the queue, so we really appreciate that. And on behalf of Cyndi and everybody at Flexera, we're thrilled you could join us today. We hope you found this informative. Look for the email so you can replay this. You'll get the link to replay this. We have more exciting webinars for you throughout the year, so please stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day, everybody.